I got two questions if there's time. The first one...
We're ready. Wait.
On your mark.
Is it important to you to stump us?
No, I've been listening to you for years. I've never heard anybody with this kind of situation. So, are you familiar with
sorry, our time is up.
Story of my life? Are you familiar with what a satori is, instant awakening?
Tell us.
Well, I had one, and I didn't believe in it, didn't know it existed, but you're just all of a sudden, you have this instant where you become aware of a whole bunch of things, that there's a reason for existence and all that.
Well, what happens in a situation like that, the label was, Esther couldn't translate the label for us, but as you define what it is,
right.
What you're describing is a sort of awakening. We would also call it an aligning. We would call it for whatever reason you left enough resistance behind that you were a vibrational match to infinite intelligence, and so, and weren't in a place of resisting it, and so you had that sort of clarity. Right. Jerry tells stories as he was an entertainer and ran away to join the circus and that sort of thing, that on more than one occasion he met a friend that was high on something who had the insight of all of the answers to all of the questions of all of the universe, and just babbled nonsense to him as far as he was concerned, but the man truly knew that he had touched true enlightenment, and so you do it all the time.
You know, the problem with this is I became aware of a whole bunch of things, a couple of which are very disturbing. First, I became aware that I apparently am an exception to everything that you teach. You say we came here joyfully and all this other, and I was made very aware that I didn't want to come here and that I was extremely angry about coming into this life experience.
Well, here's the thing. As we said to someone earlier here today, that whenever you're interacting with another person, in other words, we're talking about truth, and how truth is perceptual, and how you could be conveying something to us and we could convey what we know to be, but what you hear from us is more about where you stand as you hear it than it is about what we say. Right. In other words, we can only express what we know to be, but we can't control how it is received. And it's sort of like those eyewitness reports that you see so much discrepancy in. People aren't lying. They just truly have different perspectives which color the way that they see things. So here's our picture or our explanation of what you're describing here. We know that without exception, you are not the exception, because we know that without exception, everyone that came forth came with a clear desire to come forth. And earlier we were demonstrating that there is, here you are, one singular, or pure, we mean by that, powerful vibration of utter well-being. There is no source of evil. There's no source of darkness. In other words, you don't walk into a room and look for a dark switch. You can't flip a switch and flood darkness into the room. You don't open the closet door and hope darkness seeps in and covers up the light. In other words, there's a source of darkness which you can resist, a source of light which you can resist and cause darkness, but there is no source of darkness, no source of evil, although you can resist the well-being that would flow. So here you are before your emergence into this body as pure positive energy. And then in the moment you're born, and depending upon the conditions and times and environment into which you are born, there is always an immediate difference in that pure signal into what you were born into. That, frankly, is one of the reasons that babies cry. In other words, it's not easy to be born. People are always sympathizing with the mother who has had that painful delivery, but the baby has emerged into something that, we got to tell you, doesn't feel all that good in relationship with what it has been feeling just before. So, and we think it is from that perspective that depiction of how you felt about it began, because and if once you come back into alignment with who you are, that feeling goes away. People say things to us all the time like, Abraham, this can't be right. If pure positive energy is as non-physical as, like you say, pure positive energy, then why would anybody be birthed or born into a physical environment? Why would we come? And we say, because you wanted the exposure to the experience, because there was so much more potential for becoming. A man sat in the chair recently and said, I have a really important question I want to ask you, but my friends, when I told them about it, said I shouldn't ask it. But I'm going to ask it anyway, he said. Why does the dog put its head out the window of the automobile? and risk getting bugs in its eyes. And we say, because the ride is so worth it. And so that's sort of the attitude that all of you had coming into this experience. You did feel exuberance, and you did feel purpose, and you did feel potential, and you did have that knowledge. But when you are born into an environment and people are irritated, then why didn't I remember all of that? And we say, you didn't remember it because you didn't remember it in those specific words or terminology, because you're born into a new environment where you were going to find your new way and find your new desires, but you knew that you had guidance within you that would always guide you back to that, you see.
Then why would I have this experience to remember this if it's...
Well, here's another thing that we want you to know, and that is that there is this stream of non-physical. When you connect with your inner being, what you hear from your inner being are words like, you are good and you have value and you are worthy and life is supposed to be good for you and you get to choose and you are free and whatever you want, we will guide you. In other words, your source doesn't talk in words like that, but that is the vibrational intent that Esther is interpreting. In other words, that's what your source means. That's what your inner being means. That's who you really are means. But in this environment, every thought that has ever been thought still exists. And law of attraction causes a coalescing of these thoughts. In other words, thoughts that match come together. And in time, there is a current or a stream or a river of these thoughts. And so there are a lot of people who, because of the way that they've been treated by those around them, have lost their sense of worthiness, have lost their sense of connection. When Esther sees it happen sometimes in a restaurant with a parent and a child, she just cringes because she wants to snatch that little child and take it over to her table for a little while to reassure it of its worthiness and of its value, see. And so, but because every thought that is ever thought still exists, and because law of attraction causes a coalescing of these thoughts into rivers and streams, it's possible for you to, from some vibrational stance that your life has brought you to connect with something that is different from what source is telling you. When Esther began receiving us, all kinds of people came to her and said, you need to make sure that you've protected yourself. You need to offer some ritual or do such and such so that you make sure that what you get is good. And Esther said, Abraham, what are they talking about? Is there something that I need to be worried about? And we say, wherever you are vibrationally is what you will attract. And in the same way that once you learn how to read English, you could pick up any book that is written in English and read it, whether it's a subject that feels good to you or whether it's a subject that feels bad to you. And so we think that if you have received something that is making you believe that you did not want to come into this physical experience, we've got to say to you that there is a distortion somewhere in the translation of that.
Well, my life experience has been building castles on foundations of quicksand, and at least that would explain why I get all the lows in life, but I don't ever get the highs.
Well, what happens, though, you see, as you have an experience early on in life, it sort of sets the tone of your vibration. And then that's your point of attraction. And so here some more comes, and here some more comes, and here some more comes. And sometimes it feels better to hear that this is a discussion that we have often with people who want to talk about karma. Because they'll say, and it's logical, isn't it? If my life isn't going well, and I know that I wanted it to go well, and it isn't going well, then I want to find some way of explaining why it isn't going well. And the stories that you all come up with to explain that are just remarkable. Some tell you that you are unworthy. Some tell you that you are making up for something that you lived in some other life experience. And we want to say to you that it's all about the vibrational separation between those 2 points of vibrational relativity. That's all that it has ever been. But we can understand how sometimes we would... Which feels better, blame or guilt? Blame feels better every time. They're rotten choices we're giving you here, but blame feels so much better than guilt. And so a lot of people come to this conclusion that the cards just were stacked against them, because that feels better than saying, I just didn't apply myself well. But what we notice as we begin to talk with people about deliberate creation is that in the beginning, most people really like the idea of being the creator of their own reality. Almost immediately, you feel a high rising up within them because they do want control of their own experience. And then shortly after that, most people feel sort of uncomfortable about it because they're not sure how to go about creating their own reality. It's really interesting to watch you all, because you want to create your own reality if you think you can. But if you don't think you can, then you don't want to be responsible for creating your own reality. So what's happened to you is that at an early age, you sort of, we won't say you got off on the wrong foot, because as a powerful creator, oh, here it is. This is what you're reaching for. This is the answer to your question. Wait, there's more coming. There's so much to tell you in so little time. So sometimes you hit the ground running. And sometimes the intensity of that which you are is greater than at other times. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you're born into an environment of exaggerated contrast in order to give birth to big desire, because it is so satisfying to achieve those big desires. Mm-hmm. If you were a tennis player and you were good at the sport, you would not look for someone that you could beat every time. You would be looking for people at the top of their game, because you would want them to draw more from you. And you would want the experience of becoming more. And so in that exact attitude, you chose, you did choose, you chose, you did choose, you chose, you did choose to come forth into an environment of exaggerated contrast for the wow factor, for the exaggerated factor, for the desire factor to be big. And had we bumped into you earlier, doesn't matter, it's not something that should have happened. You could have figured this out earlier on, and you would not have had so many of those castles built on sand sort of thing. Doesn't matter, you're figuring it out now. We want to say to you that the reason that you or anyone feels negative emotion in any moment in time is because you have taken a vantage point that is very different from who you really are, from the vantage point of who you really are. In other words, when you don't like you, you don't feel good because who you really are adores you. When you don't like this life, you feel rotten because who you really are adores this life. When you're critical of yourself or someone else, it feels rotten because who you really are praises and applauds you and others. You get the sense of what we're talking about.
Exactly.
So what we're telling you in that is that your inner being, your source, will not join you in one negative thought about anything. Isn't that interesting? In other words, if that gap's going to close, you got to come up to it. Source isn't going to come down to it.
No,
your mother will. Your mother will. Your best friend will. In other words, almost everybody you know, they'll be there for you. But source, the reason source is source, source is always there for you, but you've got to come to source, you see. So the question that we want to put to you is, if your inner being, if that God within you, if who you really are, will not join you in one negative thought, then what do you think the odds are that it would send you into a life experience that you didn't want to come into? Or what do you think the odds are that it would send you back into another life to make up for something that you screwed up before?
That's why I don't understand why I had the experience.
It's not happening, is it? It's not happening. And so the reason you had the experience is the reason that you were born into such strong contrast is because you are a powerful teacher who likes to play the game in a big way. And the strong contrast puts you in a place at this still very young age of strong wanting. And when you get up to speed with that strong wanting, the result of that will be a soaring beyond that which almost anybody will ever soar. When Jerry was a little boy, he was very sick. He lived in a country that he was allergic to. He worked on a farm where he was constantly in the hay and the dirt and the dust. Summer after summer, he'd get sick, and winter after winter, they would tell his mother that he probably wouldn't make it through the winter. And in all of that sickness, Jerry's desire for wellness shot out of him. In other words, powerful desires were born out of all of that contrast. And today, he is one of the healthiest people that you will ever meet because his desire got out there, and then he found vibrational alignment with that desire. In other words, contrast serves you well. All contrast is serving. And what this gathering is about is to help you utilize the contrast in a productive way. And what you're demonstrating through your life and questions is that when contrast is so great, while it can be adventurous, it is a rough ride. And from this point forward, it does not need to be so rough.